Thanks very much. Thanks for being here. We're just going to have a little hang today. I brought along some tracks to play with so that you don't just have to listen to drums. And then I'll play an open solo and talk about that. There's other things that I get asked a lot in clinics that I want to cover. And open it up to you guys to ask questions and anything that you guys want to know about that you've heard me do or that we discussed today to develop it further. The tune I just played was called Schizophrenic, and it's, as of today, it hasn't been released, but it's a new tune by Oz Noy, a guitar player, great guitar player that I work with quite a bit, and Will Lee's playing bass on the track. And it's the perfect title, Schizophrenic, because it really is kind of all over the place stylistically. It starts with the head is kind of a James Brown 16-note funk kind of feel as an intro, and then the actual head is like a bar of the James Brown groove into like a bashing rock riff for a bar. So it goes back and forth. So I think of those two parts as one thing, and then the bridge is this floaty kind of jazzier sounding section with some kicks to hit, and that's basically how I'm hearing it. 3 different parts. The main groove is very similar to maybe the Funky Drummer kind of vibe, where it sounds like. So that's the basic groove for the head and the intro, and then it just goes in and out I just hear like a really crashy, bashy sound, to give it that rock attitude for a bar. It goes back and forth. It's a lot of fun to play. It kind of touches on a lot of elements that I draw from in my playing anyway, which is coming from a rock attitude, but with a jazz kind of improvisational spirit behind it, different playing with different touches and feels. So it's a fun tune to play.
Keith, your performance in that song was really groove oriented, and I think a lot of drummers tend to use that term very loosely. Like, this drummer has great groove, this drummer's groove's really fat. So how would you define the word groove? And then maybe how would you look for characteristics in either other musicians or in the groove yourself to try to create that ultimate groove for the song?
To me, a groove is something that, first of all, makes you want to move, makes you want to dance, Even when I play, a lot of times, if I'm really feeling it, I move in my seat a little bit just to kind of keep a consistent feel happening in the hands and the space between the notes. And that's really what's important, is the space between the main pulse, meaning the kick and snare for groove music, is very consistent. And then everything in between, all the subdivisions, the grace notes and different accents and dynamics that you use in between those main beats are what makes it something a little more special and unique. In that tune, for instance, I used a lot of different levels of grace notes and maybe some accents and open hi-hat, things like that, just to kind of spice it up and give it a little bit more character. Like in a groove like that, I'm really focusing on what is the most important thing of the groove, and that's having the space between that very simple groove consistent, and then subdividing in between the 16th notes, need to stay very consistent also. And there's different ways that those 16 notes can be very strict, or they can be more loose, depending on how you feel them and how the rest of the band feels them, So there's a lot of variables.
How about the dynamic control?
And yeah, dynamics, that's going to change everything, because you really have to have consistency with those two. The grace notes, everything is I try to place it where I want to hear it. So in between those notes that I played, I'll show just some examples of levels of grace notes that can enhance the groove. So with that same groove in mind, I'm using a lot of hi-hat accents, to create a phrase, and my left hand is free to kind of. I think that it's improvising in a way. I have to trust that, whether I'm playing eighth notes on the hi-hat or 16th notes, I feel like I can trust that that's going to be okay. I got to trust myself that I got a handle on keeping the time as steady as I want it to be, and then everything else lines up with that. If this is playing eighth notes and I have 16th notes on the left hand as the subdivision, it really needs to line up. And I'll show you what I mean. And with the bass drum as well, lining up on the one. I'll just play little examples of that. So anyway, that's kind of, if that makes sense, I'm actually thinking of how these line up with the eighth note. So it all kind of sounds, cool together. Because you can sometimes hear players that don't necessarily have that happening, and it can really kill the groove.
Just have one more little follow-up to that. Do you think your body position and your grip really affects the feel of your groove?
I've never thought about it, but I guess, we all move differently and, walk differently and set up differently and hear what we're playing differently. I'm sure there's something to do with it, but I've never thought about it. Yes?
Could you talk about some of your most important influences and possibly demonstrate some of the ways that they've affected your playing?
I guess like a lot of us, I have a lot of influences, and the drummers is a wide range of players that really impacted me. I'm from Mississippi originally, so I grew up listening to a lot of blues and soul and rock music, southern rock music, and later got into jazz and more progressive rock and fusion and everything I could get my hands on. I guess some of the drummers that really impacted me would be people like, from Keith Moon to Mitch Mitchell. Those guys to me had the the jazz improvisation spirit, but it was coming from a rock place, which I identified with tremendously. People like Neil Peart, was impactful because of the way he came up with his parts. It may not be so much improvisational, but the thought that went into the parts really made the songs what they are. So I learned a lot about constructing things in a meaningful way, hopefully. In the jazz world, I think Elvin Jones and Jack DeJohnette, Tony Williams, very much a part of what got me excited about learning more about the drums and playing differently, playing melodically, trying to learn how to play more compositionally. And then the groove guys like Steve Jordan and, I guess all these guys can do a lot of other things, but just Steve Jordan, Charlie Drayton, Zigaboo from the Meters, a lot of New Orleans kind of funk music really impacted me. But the thing about it is all these guys really have a sound of their own, and you can really hear it and identify who it is right away. And that's really, I think, something that I've always wanted to aspire to be, is to have something that's my own in some way. You take all these influences and you put it together in your own way, and without copying it, you kind of take the vibe of it or the spirit of it or the attitude or whatever it is that you like about it that grabs your attention. And people like Elvin Jones that played with so much passion, so much emotion, really changed my life when I saw that for the first time. So I think for me, it's, I don't know if I could really sit here and demonstrate how each one, influenced my playing. I think it's just putting it all together in a way that makes sense, putting all those different styles together in a way that works. And I think because I approached, or because I was just fortunate to be around that kind of diversity growing up, that it really helped me to get the work I've been fortunate to get. Because the guys that have hired me are drawing from a lot of different styles musically, So I think I could identify with those pretty quickly. And I think it's just really good to be open to all different styles, even if you think it's not really your bag. It can actually give you something to add to your playing and change it. You'll be a better musician for it, There's other influences, not just drummers. At a point, I had to stop listening to drummers to kind of, because I didn't want to sound too much like someone. If I was listening to them too much, I'd freak out, like, okay, well, maybe that'll come out. And I noticed that it would sometimes, And so I could tell, wow, I've been listening to that person way too much. So when I heard myself back at a recording, from a gig. And so anyway, long story, I just stopped altogether. And I got influence from singers, how they phrase, people like Al Green or Frank Sinatra or horn players that, just learning the way other people phrase their instruments and just listening to other things than just the drums, really helped to open me up,
Could you demonstrate some New Orleans grooves? Because I can definitely hear them in your playing. So
It's definitely a big part of I guess, a lot of my phrasing and vocabulary, so to speak, because I really got into the Meters a lot and Zigaboo and second line type rhythms, and growing up playing in marching bands and things like that. So I hear a lot of even more military cadence style playing as well. One way to think about it is the in-between. It's not necessarily straight, not necessarily, dotted 16ths, because that would sound really hokey. It's kind of more in between, kind of loosey-goosey kind of vibe as well. And I can just play some phrases that are influenced by that. Or something a little quicker would sound like this.
any certain grooves that influenced you? Like James Brown, is there like a funky drum groove that you spent time learning? The Meters, is there like a Sissy Strut groove?
Just as an example, you bring up the Sissy Strut. I mean, I think that backbeat, having the, you know, those things were definitely an influence. You know, the double backbeat. You know, because the second line rhythms always accent the 4. You know, because if you're hearing it, 4, 2, 3, 4, 1, da, da. So you can hear how those things relate in a way. And also the chugga-chugga element, which if I slow it down, it's maybe a little better. Now, if you take like a second line kind of thing, meters kind of thing, so if there's tempo like this. So I'm basically just taking that as a melody and then improvising with it, letting it turn into something else, you know, using it as an idea, and then that's how all those things kind of happen. But I think I'm always hearing that 2, 4, 1, 2, you know. A lot of those things in New Orleans music just are really greasy and funky, and so I guess there's some of that in the phrases that I play a lot of the time. Thanks very much. So that was just an open solo. I'm just improvising. I'm trying to play something that has a little more meaning than just random licks that I may have practiced in the practice room. And the ways that I feel I can do that is to play in even phrases. I'm always thinking in 8-bar phrases, for the most part. I think in that actual solo, there may have been a few sections that got off of that form, but for the most part, I try to keep those phrases internally, whether I'm making them obvious or not. And I'll start with just some kind of motif, something that's repetitive. I started on the snare drum, just playing some sounds and buzzes and letting it kind of roll around with the harmonics. I don't know if you could hear that very well, but and the bass drum figure was like one, dun, dun, something like that, dun, dun, dun. And I just kind of let that develop into something else, let it, stay there for a minute, and then start to hear something along with that. Maybe I'll go to something else, another color or something within those 8 bars, and then maybe come back to that motif, just to kind of give the listener something to hold on to, or at least that has some kind of flow, And I think of it as, usually every solo's different, obviously, and I'm not always inspired as I am other times. But the fun part about it is to think of it as a composition and play like an A section, and then let that develop into, you can think of it like a song, a B section, and then you have your chorus, and then you go back to the intro, and then you go to the next A section. Let that be a little different. And ways that I do that, for me, when I get to the end of an idea within the 8-bar phrases that I try to keep internally, if I feel like I've said everything I can say, then I may completely change tempo or time signature. I went into 6/8 in this for a while, played kind of shuffle patterns that went into more of a 16th note 6/8 kind of feel, back and forth, and just trying to use dynamics and different sounds, getting different sounds out of the snare drum, and play with the hands, turn the snares off, use the other snare drum. Just trying, basically in front of you guys, I'm trying to find some new things to play, So it's a challenge to make it sound the way I want it to sound every time, but the idea is I want it to be something musical and something the listener can latch onto that has some kind of purpose, And I'm generally using grooves for the most part that I'm breaking up between the hi-hat, snare drum, and bass drum, as a jazz drummer would in a jazz setting. The ride cymbal, when I'm in these type of grooves, the ride cymbal is constant, in a jazz setting. It's playing the swing, it's playing the time. And that's where the time is really centered in a jazz setting. And then these limbs are free to interact and comp and with the soloist or rhythm section. So, it's just the same concept, but I'm using more of a bottom-heavy approach, more like a rock approach, really, or funk, or whatever you want to call it. And I still have something up here that's pretty constant, 8th notes or 16th note patterns. And these can kind of find new little, I like to think of them as, they're kind of talking to each other. There might be some melodic things in there that I'm hearing, or some kind of phrase, rhythmical phrase, that'll happen. And it'll happen in the moment, and I'm like, okay, I'm going to play that again. Let it kind of sit there as an idea, and then let it develop into something else, So it's all very spontaneous. There's several ways that I could demonstrate that, but one way that I think would help is if I turn on the click, and I could just play some of those phrases so you can hear them in context with the pulse and hear these 8-bar phrases I'm talking about. What I'll do is I'll play, just for the demonstration's sake, I'll play 8 bars more straight time. The next 8 bars, I'll weave in and out of it, you know, and just go back and forth, just for demonstration. So maybe at a little slightly faster tempo, I'll do a couple of those 8s and 8s back and forth, and then maybe the last time around, I'll let it continue. I'll just keep letting it develop and just play, you know, because I wouldn't normally play it this way. Maybe I would, but usually it would just kind of be a stream of consciousness. An idea would turn into another idea. So I'll go back and forth, and then maybe the last time, play a few 8s, you know, whatever happens, happens. Just a little faster tempo. maybe one more example in 3 or 6, however you want to count it. You know, either 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, or 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So those are just examples of when I can get away with playing this way, which is not all the time, obviously, with a lot of the more structured gigs that I do. But when I have a chance, I love to explore this and find new ways to play grooves. It doesn't always have to be 2 and 4 on the snare, you know. It depends on the music, it depends on the context, and usually this would be in more of a instrumental group, you know, that I try to keep going when I can, which has a lot to do with the Wayne Krantz Trio and how this approach kind of happened, which we'll get to later. But those 8-bar phrases are really important, and that's how we stay connected, and it's just a really good exercise in phrasing, because as you'll notice, I'm not always given a big 1 at the end of the phrase. I feel it inside, but I let it keep going. I let the phrase continue, like a long phrase. Sometimes they're shorter, sometimes they're longer. So anyway, hopefully that inspires you to just try some, you know, little melodies, I like to call them. But it's a lot of fun.
Keith,
Yes.
in your solo there, it seemed like there's a lot of layers happening. It seemed like you're also doing like a quarter note or maybe just a triplet thing with your left foot while you're keeping more the 16th note thing on the other limbs. Can you maybe talk about that, how you're layering those two?
A lot of times when I'm in a position where I can kind of stretch out and find new things to play, accidents will happen or things will happen that maybe I didn't intend to happen. That just started happening recently where I just started hearing the hi-hat just completely out of context within the groove that I'm playing, just as an effect. You know, it can sound really bad in the wrong place, but but if it's just for an effect, for just like a quick, you know, couple of beats, I think it's kind of cool. It's just a little, you know, something that happens and you're like, oh, I don't know where that came from, but you know, it just has an interesting way of getting the groove to do something completely different that you wouldn't expect, you know.
The contrast of the two.
I guess if I'm playing in a 6/8 kind of feel, I guess it's kind of like a 4/3 almost, right? If I'm I think that's how it first happened, and then I thought that sounded a little too calculated, a little too thought out. So I just experimented with maybe something a little more out of, just completely out, you know, of context. Yeah, it just came from trying it and letting it develop, and it just comes out here and there. I would never do that on a gig with, you know, Steely Dan or someone that hired me to play their music. That's just something, obviously, that can happen in the more improvisational setting. Yeah.
Has your development of these phrases become more of a sense to you, where you're not necessarily thinking 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4? It's just you just naturally come back around in the beginning of that phrase.
Yeah, I think I definitely just feel the 8-bar phrase. I mean, in general, in most pop music or, you know, popular music, Western music, that's what we're used to. The phrases are usually 8 bars, so it's kind of natural to hear that. But I've just developed it over the years, playing with Wayne's Trio and other instrumental settings. Just years and years of trying different things, and now it's just more of an internal feeling. Yeah.
You do a lot of really interesting hand and foot combinations. Could you give us some examples of that playing style?
That was basically what I was trying to do there in that example. I guess the way that I approach it, like I said earlier, is something constant is happening, usually in the ride cymbal, because I like playing the hi-hat with the foot to maybe replace something the bass drum would do. For example, if you take just a simple groove like doom to get doom gat doom to get doom gat, and put the hi-hat in place of some of the bass drum, then you're kind of doing an independent exercise if you look at it that way. And so that could sound like this. See, I wanted it to go somewhere else, you know? Like it was almost developing into something else. I got away from my original example, but those things are kind of cool. Just it makes you hear things in a different way and changes the groove a little bit. I do a lot of that with the hi-hat if I'm riding. I think of it maybe as another snare drum. Other examples of that would be 2, 3. From my jazz period in college where I was studying more jazz independence, I just took that approach to playing more groove-oriented music. You know, why not? You know, there's no rules that this has to always be straight eighth notes or sixteenths or quarters. I mean, the ride cymbal's taking care of that. And that's creating the flow, and the groove is always moving forward. So, you know, as long as everything is in the right place dynamically and it still has some kind of a forward motion and a pulse, that's a groove, you know? So that's kind of how I try to approach that, is I still want it to be danceable even though it's not 2 and 4 on the snare drum, you know? And it's not given to you like, you know, verbatim. So that's just one way to approach grooves, you know. I think the most important thing is to have, the only way you can do what I'm doing is to have a strong sense of pulse and to really have a groove that is very consistent, you know, so that you can stretch out and do those type of things. And that, working with the artists that I've been fortunate to work with, has given me that experience of just playing a show night after night where you're called to just keep a steady groove all night long, you know, from beginning to end. You know, it should stay exactly where you started and end at the same place, you know, and feel good all the way through. So that's something I've had a lot of experience doing, and I love doing that just as much as I love doing more improvisational stuff too. It's great to have that to draw from, and I think these artists that I work with do draw from a lot of different styles. So every now and then it can come out just a little bit, you know, if need be or called upon to do. Yeah.
Hey Keith, I was wondering if you could talk about how you developed just getting around the toms and using doubles and rudiments and all that, just kind of all over the drums, I guess.
Everything that I play is based on rudiments. You know, it's either flams, doubles, you know, the occasional singles, you know, and that's basically, if you break everything down, I think that's what's happening. But more specifically, I use a lot of double stroke rolls and flams, and never been much of a singles player guy. I've developed the rolls to feel, hopefully, have the same effect, you know. So a lot of it is based on 5-stroke rolls, 6-stroke rolls, 7-stroke rolls, and flams around the toms. I can show some examples of that. One thing I do a lot is a 7-stroke roll into the beginning of a phrase, you know, which would sound like this. One. And there's ways that, you know, I'll change the phrase around. Maybe like use it like this. It's really effective, I think. Just instead of, you know, stroking them out singly, which I probably couldn't do very well, it has the same effect, you know. Maybe more legato sounding and not so, you know, pounding. other things that are so great. It's just a 6-stroke roll. It's a classic Motown feel that we all probably play. But things like that, obviously, you guys know what this sounds like. But like. So I'm still thinking in 8-bar phrases, just doing these examples. So hopefully you'll hear that I'm always hearing these phrases and trying to put, just like I put the 6-stroke roll in different places, but I'm still thinking, yeah. So it just helps me to think of ways to break things up that are pretty common, but you can turn them into something completely different, just by not playing it the classic way. I put it somewhere else in the phrase, and it became something else, And that's how I approach everything. I'm always trying to find ways to make it just a little different, and somehow make it sound. Maybe it sounds more complicated than it really is, But it keeps it fresh. Another thing is flams. Flams are great, just as it's just a little statement, the most simple thing. A lot of times I find that just playing an intro for a tune that's about to go into full groove, you don't have the snare in yet, whatever. I do this a lot with some of the Steely Dan tracks that I've played on. So if it's just, I'll just play 4 bars up top and then flam in, stuff like that. Another thing is if I'm just doing like a really big, trying to, build up the tune to the next section where I'm going to ride out, I might use flams just within an 8th note fill, the most simple thing, and it just gives it a little more power. Maybe something like, I'll play a 4-bar groove and then I'll do the big, here we go to the end of the song chorus or something. So there again, I'm just playing flams within single strokes. And it's endless what you can do with it. You can voice it on the cymbals, you can, voice it around the kit in whatever way you decide to do that. And it's a very effective way to build something and give it some tension, And then using dynamics within that. so it's not just all ba ga 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 ga. It's like ga 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 go go, you know, that kind of stuff. Yeah.
I noticed during your solo when you're playing, you get several different sounds out of your snare, like playing stick on stick. Can you show me some demonstrations of that and kind of go into that a little bit?
The way I started thinking about that is playing in Wayne Cranch's trio. They started using so many pedals, you know, for sound effects. You know, Tim would use a lot of octaves and octave pedals and Mooger Frugers and, you know, all these crazy sounding, you know, pedals that I thought, well, I don't have electronics, so I need to figure out ways to find some different sounds, you know, to make it sound a little more processed or something, you know. So I just started experimenting with taking the snares off and finding the harmonics. Sometimes it helps to put your finger in the middle of the drum. And you can kind of change the wow sound, you know. And I thought, well, I can make it sound like a gate if I let it ring and then muffle it with my left hand. Like, you know, however long I want it to ring. Same with if the snares are on. So, that was the first thing I noticed, is just, and just to use it in grooves, like, a lot of this is a lot of the same type of expression I'm trying to do when I'm doing the other thing where I'm playing with sticks, but it's just putting it in a different place, you know. Left hand is probably doing a lot of the same things this would be doing if I was playing with my stick, but I'm just getting a different sound using that, and whether it is muffled or not. And then I can also use a cross stick with it. So like another example. 1, 2. Playing on the rims instead of the hi-hat or ride cymbal can add a whole other vibe to a groove, you know. That's just kind of something to experiment with, just getting different sounds out of not only the snare drum, but everything. You know, there's ways to do that if you want to experiment. Yeah.
Could you talk about how you get different sounds out of your cymbals and your technique of playing them? It seems like you almost pull back instead of hitting into the cymbal.
Yeah, well, what's happening is the stick is really naturally rebounding back. So my basic stroke I use a lot of fingers. And the stick I'm just throwing it down, and we'll get to my technique in a little more detail later. it applies to the cymbals and the toms and snare, everything. I think of it all the same. Just throwing it down like a ball, letting it bounce back, like a basketball would just bounce back. You're not lifting it; it's coming back by itself. So you're pushing it back down. That's kind of what I'm trying to feel, and almost like I'm pulling the sound out instead of digging into it. Same with the toms. I want them to resonate. So I'm trying to, it's kind of a timpani technique. I'm just pulling it out. But I'm not always lifting. It's more of a bounce, And then, of course, you can use the shaft of the stick to get accents. And, the shaft here or here to get a different sound. Obviously, the bell or the beat on the bell, all those are different sounds. So I'll show you different examples of that. Same thing on the hi-hat. You can get a lot of different attitudes just out of eighth notes. So I'll show you some examples of all that. I'll just try to throw it all in, just in a basic groove. Anyway, I don't know if I covered all of them, but you get the point. Just playing just a ride time, there's a lot you can get out of it. If you're doing like a house groove or something, which this band Rudder I play with does a lot of those. Just a small example of that. I love the way just getting a really pointed sound with just the beat on the bell. It's kind of a cool vibe. You don't always have to bang it out, Yes, sir.
Sometimes in your solo, it seems like you're playing some air strokes, like you're not making contact with the drum or cymbal, but you're still stroking. Is that just your way of subdividing the time, keeping yourself organized, or is it you're just not even thinking about that, just happening?
I'm certainly not thinking about it, but it may just be something that I was going to go for, and I decided not to. Or it could have been just, a lot of times I use a lot of arm motion to help me with the flow of what I'm trying to play. And whatever it is, it has to be a consistent movement. So it could be something like that, but I'm not really sure. It's not something I consciously think about. Yeah.
During your solo, I heard you building up tension, then releasing, then building up tension, releasing, and doing that several times. I don't know if maybe it was my perception or maybe it's something that you're thinking about. So maybe you could talk about that. If you're thinking about it, which ways do you use to build up that tension and then releasing?
That's part of music is tension and release. So if I'm playing a solo, I want it to be musical. So that's one way of playing music is maybe dynamically building up to a peak, and it could also be a flurry of sound, or it could be something really just loud. I mean, it could be a lot of different things. Or it could be, doesn't necessarily have to be a loud thing. It could be something that's happening that it may feel like it's about to fall apart. You know, it might just feel like things are just, it's not going to make it, you know, and then all of a sudden it does, you know. That's what I love about Elvin Jones, you know, like he had this rolling thing that was always happening, and the authority behind that, I mean, whatever he does is right, you know. You know, it's an authority thing, it's a confidence thing, and just, you know, for me, I don't think it's necessarily a horrible thing if I make a mistake or if things don't come out exactly like I wanted it to, because when you're in the moment, you know, just like talking with you now, I don't always say it exactly like, maybe I didn't pronounce it exactly right, you know, it just came out like a slur, you know, just because I'm talking too fast or whatever it is. It's just, music is the same way, or can be, you know. So that's the beauty of just letting things happen and not worrying so much about it or not thinking so much.